And so
And let's be clear about Brother Fidel Castro. Brother Fidel Castro is the reason why South Africa got liberated. When Nelson Mandela met with Fidel Castro during his ceremony of freedom, and Nelson Mandela stuck his hand out, Fidel Castro hugged him and said, "No, this is how brothers greet each other."
That's right.
Because when the Cubans came in there and started kicking them coward South African policemen in the butt,
Right.
they turned around and ran.
And so
now, as long as they was attacking defenseless Africans and they were
men
able
and
to,
women, yes.
they were okay.
Yeah.
But when Fidel said enough is enough, so don't get it confused, brothers
Right.
and sisters. You know, Fidel Castro is a great man.
Right.
And when all the other nations were turning their back and whispering, and maybe we should, and maybe Fidel took action.
Right. He represents a true revolutionary spirit.
Without a doubt.
And then his linkage to Africa is clear. Cuba
Clear.
has a heavy African population.
Clear.
And even though Fidel may look like he doesn't have it, but he feels it. And he sent his
He
people
proved it.
not only to fight in the revolutionary struggles in southern Africa, you're talking about Namibia, as well as Angola and Mozambique and South Africa. The Cubans were a critical mass of fighters, but more than that, they continued the relationship with Mother Africa by sending thousands of health workers and physicians and nurses. They are still in the rural areas of Africa today. So the Cuban Revolution and the African Revolution and the African American Revolution are sister and brother struggles to restore African humanity. And now that we have struggled on the battlefield and struggled in the streets, we have to develop the capacity to build our future. So that means the mind, that means the discipline of learning skills that you can use for the future nation building. So that's why this symbol is so important, because the unity of the skills in the Western world with the resources in the mother-father homeland will produce over the next 50 to 100 years a new African dimension. So I'm glad that we are a part of it. All these brothers and these scholars predicted this. Even the new ones on the block. Amos Wilson, the falsification of African consciousness is holding us back, because some of us think that we're Europeans. Some of us, because we speak Spanish, think that we're Spanish. And they are in denial of their African strength. African
But we're all getting
knowledge.
bit by the same dog.
That's right. And the control is through the mind. So Dr. Wade Nobles, who has just written a book on the Haitian Revolution, dealing with the development of the mind of the Haitian revolutionary leaders, he has left us with so many powerful phrases and words and understanding. Dr. Wade Nobles said, power, concede nothing without demand, it never will. That's what Frederick Douglass was writing in his important statement. But Wade Nobles went on to add that this power has to be linked to our consciousness. And he has clearly stated, black people everywhere suffer greatly from a shattered consciousness and a fractured identity. And we are working on clarifying that identity.
That's right.
And putting that
That's right.
shattered consciousness together.
Absolutely.
The restoration of the African mind is in these young people that were there at the
10-10.
the 10/10 anniversary, or the 20th anniversary. You could feel it, you could see it, you
Oh my
could hear it.
goodness. Yeah.
And as we go back to our communities, there's a flame that's been ignited with these deaths that have now been exposed, with these cell phones that can show what the situation is. But it's deeper than just the deaths of individuals. It's a system that has been put in place that has led to the creation of the biggest prison system in the history of the world. Not in China, not in Russia, but in the
Mentally and
United
physically.
States. And so one of our
Mentally and
and
physically.
physically. And one of our great sisters has dealt with it. A beautiful sister looking like Halle Berry, but she's a mother of 3 or 4 children. She's works out of Ohio State. She is in the same research center with my nephew, Dr. Hassan, and her sister is Dr. Hassan's office mate, and her name is the attorney Michelle Alexander, and she's written a monumental work of the new Jim Crow, the emergence of a prison system to replace the slave system and the neo-slave system after slavery, that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of African young men particularly have been targeted for this system of domination, destruction, and death. And so we have to work to dismantle all that and then prepare a place for these young people to come back to our communities, but they just can't come back raw. They've been so processed out of self that we need community processes in our communities to take back even a nephew who was a prominent youngster, but once he spent 10 years in jail, he's not that same nephew that was sitting on the knee of his grandfather or eating at the table of his auntie. So we have to have a process where there are jobs and where there are positions and where there are a healing taking place. That's why Minister Farrakhan's work has been so strong to call for millions to be a part of the healing. And that's what we have to see and have to understand and appreciate. And that's what we're going through. I always say it's a question of Pan-Africanism or perish. If we don't find the unity, operational unity of people of color, of African descent, we're going to perish. These other families, global families, are coming together. And they may work with us, but
they have the unity.
But they have their goal is to
Isn't
put
that the
their
way we want to
economics,
be?
politics, and cultural together. And so we are looking to integrate, first and foremost with ourselves. Then serious integration with others can take place. But one big mistake we made in the 50s and 60s was to come up with a pseudo-integration that left the foundation of the African community vulnerable. And so we've got to go back and restore that which we failed to protect.
We want to pump the brakes and put the turn signal on. First, I want to say Viva Fidel Castro. Love you.
Viva la Revolution in Cuba and the revolution of the Africans everywhere on the planet.
What we want to do now is we want to pay homage and get Dr. Jeffries to just call out some of these great freedom fighters, some of the authors, and some of the people that have just been lost in America's memory hole that we can Google and we can. Our ancestors don't die. They die when we stop talking about them, when we stop mentioning their names. So when we keep mentioning their names, they're still alive. Their spirit is still here. And because we don't know who they are, we don't know how great, and I mean great as in great, not just great, but great, a lineage that we come from, we miss a lot. Because the other nations, they know their story. They come here they never had their history erased. They never had their culture taken from them. They never had their language taken from them. We fighting all of that to try to come back whole. One of Dr. Jeffries' colleagues, Van Sertima, Ivan, he said that putting black people back together was like the crash of a big giant airline. Pieces all over the place. So you got to go far and near to get all of those pieces and put it back together so you can make that airline look like it did before it crashed. And that's what we're attempting to do right now, brothers and sisters. This is cultural glue. This is information that when we're dead and gone, we can continue the legacy and we can continue to create and think and know who we are. So Dr. Jeffries, would you please just tell us about some of the, you could just mention their names and if you know.
Yes, certainly.
Okay.
I will.
Please.
And in fact, we have had some of our people here. Dr. John Henry Clark, for example, when he talks about the unfinished revolution, he's talking about Patrice Lumumba, who was calling for independence of the Congo. He's talking about Marcus Garvey, who has so many tiger cubs that have sprung from him. His own sons, Marcus Garvey Jr., and the doctor, Dr. Julius Garvey. And brothers like Dr. Tony Martin, who come from the Caribbean and who have been inspired by the Garvey tradition. Brothers like the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams, Dr. Eric Williams, who wrote a PhD on capitalism and slavery. And then he wrote another great work.
Take your time, slow your roll,
another
brother.
great work.
You zooming, man.
They came before.
Yeah.
They Columbus and Castro. He deals with Columbus
Bennett?
and the New World. No, this is a brother from Trinidad and Tobago, Eric Williams.
Eric Williams.
And
okay.
then from South
Shantae.
America in the Caribbean comes Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. And his great work is They Came Before Columbus.
Before Columbus.
Eric Williams' great work is From Columbus to Castro. And that was his work that go out to the masses. His PhD was Capitalism and Slavery. Walter Rodney's great work was, his PhD was Slavery from the Upper Guinea Coast, on the Upper Guinea Coast. But then he wrote a work for the masses of our people, which was an extraordinary work, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And so anything by Walter Rodney, anything by Eric Williams.
Walter Rogers.
Walter Rodney.
Walter Rodney.
Rodney. You know that Rodney that was in the struggle in Los Angeles?
Yeah.
But now you got a scholar, Walter Rodney. Then you have the African American scholars par excellence. John Hope Franklin was the leading scholar of the African American struggle, but one who provided an analysis and insight.
What was one of his famous writings? It's okay, it'll come to you.
Yes.
Keep on rolling, though.
Yes. But
he's a heavyweight.
His junior partner, his junior partner in the struggle was our brother Lerone Bennett, who wrote fantastic books. They Came Before Columbus.
They Came Before Columbus.
And then
it was in all the Ebony magazines.
That's right. And because he was an editor of Ebony, so if you go to Ebony magazines, they do have a list of the books. And he added to that The Shaping of Black America. And that particular book helped me change the way I taught, because he dealt with concepts, analysis, processes, and systems. So when I teach, I try to deal with what I call caps, going to the top of the pyramid to the capstone to deal with concepts. All knowledge is organized around concepts and ideas, and all knowledge is related to analysis. In other words, you've got to link things up, and all knowledge is a part of processes, and all knowledge is S for systems, interrelated in terms of systems. So he's written several books. He's even written a book called Black Power, dealing with the independence of Ghana, and he's written articles in Ebony magazine that are excellent.
And so, we will continue, Dr. Jeffries.
And the beautiful thing about the continuation is that these pillars of our past, these ancestral scholars, have created schools of knowledge. So John Hope Franklin...
Volumes.
And that's what I mean, that in a school includes volumes, and their students have followed them. Like Dr. Clark has under him the Dr. Jeffries, the Dr. Ronald Walters out of Washington, the Dr. Ron Daniels, the sisters, the Dr. Shelby Lewis, the Dr. Barbara Sizemore. So these great...
Dr.
Barbara Sizemore, she was one of our educators. She was the principal of Washington, D.C. schools, and she went to Chicago, and she
Superintendent of Washington, D.C. schools.
Yes, superintendent of Washington, D.C. schools, and she also had a key position in Chicago, and she showed how we can educate these black youngsters. She's written several books on the education of black children. So what we're saying is that John Hope Franklin had a whole host of people under him that he touched, and the people like Ivan Van Sertima have a whole host of people that he touched and influenced and worked with, like Runoko Rashidi, who has taken up the mantle to redo some of the books by John Jackson and by other scholars, and put an introduction there. So we have to see schools of knowledge that we have to be prepared. And interesting enough, John Hope Franklin, who was in Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
That's right.
That's where his family was, and they were coming back to live when the explosion took place. But John Hope Franklin, this was the classic book for black people, From Slavery to Freedom. And that's the most extensive book in our history. And turn it on the back and you'll have a picture of John Hope Franklin. His son is into the museum, library, archive.